Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the History Cloak channel on a very special election episode. Now, if you're thinking, Mr. McGee is going to tell me who to vote for, absolutely not. I have no interest in swimming through that landmine. No, we are going to focus on what is the Electoral College? Why was it created? How does it work? After all, there are people that you see every election cycle who will argue that the Electoral College is awful and needs to be done away with. Well, we'll see why was it created and what would the ramifications be of doing away with it. To reference and really heavily paraphrase the Christian writer G.K. Chesterton, if there's a fence in the middle of the road and you come up on it, the first thing you need to ask yourself is, why is that fence there before you go about removing it? Well, in the same way, if you want to get rid of the Electoral College, we have to first understand, how does the Electoral College operate and why was it created? So, that is what we're going to do today. So ladies and gentlemen, let's begin. Well, in order to understand the Electoral College, we need to go back to the Constitutional Convention. The convention took place in Philadelphia from May 1787 to September 1787. Now, of course, a lot of different issues were debated at the convention, and I have another video that talks about that. We're going to focus on the issue of, how do you elect a president? Now, the convention took place because the United States had had the disastrous Articles of Confederation. The Articles of Confederation didn't have a Supreme Court, and it did not have an executive branch. Well, seeing the folly of that, the convention created a three-branch government: executive, legislative, and judicial. But the question, of course, was, how do you actually elect a president? There were three schools of thought as to how to elect a president. School of thought number one, have Congress elect the president. So have the legislative branch, the members of the House of Representatives and the Senate, they'll get together and they'll select a president. School of thought number two, have the state legislatures vote for president. So let's say Bob and Jim are running for president. Well, in North Carolina, the North Carolina legislature will get together. They will vote for Bob or Jim. And let's say that Bob gets 50 votes in the legislature and Jim gets 20 votes in the legislature. Well, that's one vote that goes to Bob. School of thought number three, have just a popular vote through all the citizens that are eligible to vote. So you have all the citizens vote, you tally up those votes, and whoever gets the most votes wins. Now, all three proposals were rejected. The proposal to have Congress vote on the president was rejected because, number one, it could create some very hard feelings among the legislators if their guy was not selected. Number two, Congress would be subjected to bribery. Meaning, guess what? You can't bribe an entire population of people, but you can bribe a small group of legislators. So, the idea of having Congress vote on the president, well, guess what? All it takes is for me to bribe a member of the House of Representatives here, or bribe a member of the Senate there, and voila, I have just selected the President of the United States. Well, that was something that they did not want. Also, number three, what they wanted to avoid was the presidency, the executive branch, being tied into the legislative branch. If it's the legislative branch that selects the president, then in reality, the legislative branch is more powerful than the executive branch, and whoever is president is beholden to the legislature. So, Congress selecting the president is out. Now, the second plan of having the legislatures vote on the president, that was rejected because the last thing that they wanted was the states having so much power over the federal government. Because think about it, if the president is elected by the states, then the president is not going to be able to keep a balance between central power and state power. In fact, the president will be beholden to the states, and the states will have too much power over the central government. So there would be no federal principle. In other words, no shared power between the central government and the state governments. The plan to have just a nationwide popular vote, that was rejected because if you have a nationwide popular vote, then guess what? Only the states with large populations matter. The small states will have no say in electing the president, and in fact, what would probably happen is regionalism. You would have the large states getting together to make sure that only presidents from their states got elected. So you would end up fracturing the country because these small population states would know that never would they be able to get their guy elected, and also whoever is president would not care about any of the issues that affected small states. So the question becomes, how do you have a presidential election in which the people of the country, the states in the country, and representatives in the country all have a say in the president without one group having way too much power or one group feeling disenfranchised because they don't really have a say in the election? Well, to this end, the convention created the Electoral College. Now, I do not mean college as in university that you're going to go to study and get a degree. The word college can sometimes mean a group. So for instance, when a pope dies in the Catholic Church, then the College of Cardinals comes together to elect a new pope. So college in this case means a group of people. So in our Electoral College system, people in the states vote for representatives to vote for the president. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, let's take a look at the 2020 presidential map. Now, if you look at the map, you'll notice that there are various numbers all over the map. Georgia has a 16, Texas has a 38, Oklahoma has a 7, Ohio has an 18. Well, what on earth do those numbers mean? Well, those are the number of electoral votes that each state gets. That number is based on how many representatives that state has in the House of Representatives, plus their 2 senators. So for instance, Ohio has 16 members of the House of Representatives and 2 senators. By the way, all states have 2 senators. The House of Representatives is based on population. So the higher the population of a state, the more representatives that state gets. So that is why you see a difference in numbers. Now we're going to take a look at 2 states, Texas and California. Now, Texas has a 38, so Texas gets 38 electoral votes. Now, the Democrats, by whatever rules the Democratic Party has in place, had selected 38 Texas Democrats who wanted to go to Washington, D.C. to vote for Joe Biden. The Republicans, by whatever rules the Republican Party has within their party, they had selected 38 Texas Republicans who wanted to go to Washington, D.C. to vote for Donald Trump. Now, the question is, whose group of 38 gets to go to Washington, D.C.? Well, that is where the Texas voters come in. If you were a legal resident of Texas and a citizen of the United States, when you voted for Joe Biden or Donald Trump. You were voting for which group of 38 you wanted to go to Washington, D.C. to vote for the president. Now, because Texas is red, we know that more people voted for Donald Trump's group of 38 than Joe Biden's group of 38. Thus, Donald Trump won the 38 electoral votes of Texas. Now, if we look at California, California has the largest population, therefore they have the largest number of electoral votes. They have 55 electoral votes. The same thing plays out. So the Republicans, by whatever rules the Republicans have within their party, had selected 55 California Republicans who wanted to go to Washington, D.C. to vote for Donald Trump. The Democrats, by whatever rules they have within the Democratic Party, had selected 55 California Democrats who wanted to go to Washington, D.C. to vote for Joe Biden. The goal of a California resident was to vote for which group of 55 they wanted to send to Washington, D.C. Since California is blue, we know that the majority of California residents selected Joe Biden's group of 55 to go to Washington, D.C., hence Joe Biden gets those 55 electoral votes. Now, there are 538 total electoral votes. By the way, Washington, D.C. gets 3 electoral votes per the 23rd Amendment. So even though Washington, D.C. isn't a state, there are U.S. citizens within Washington, D.C., so they get the number of electoral votes of the least populous state, which is Wyoming. So Washington, D.C. gets 3 electoral votes. So to win the presidency, you have to win enough states to get to at least 270 electoral votes. If you can get to 270, then that means your opponent will only get to 268, and voila, you are president of the United States. Now, why has this system lasted so long? Well, you have to win enough states to get to 270. Well, guess what? That means you're going to have to crisscross the United States and win both small and large states. If you didn't have the Electoral College and it was just a popular vote, most presidential candidates would only spend time in California, New York, Texas, and Florida. The other 46 states, well, hey, who cares about them? As long as I can win urban areas in those 4 states, I would become president. The Electoral College forces any presidential candidate to really have to win a majority of the states. So any candidate who wants to win the presidency really does have to know the issues that affect all Americans. Now, by the way, what party the residents of a state prefer has changed over the centuries. It ebbs and flows. So for instance, this was the electoral map in 1984. Now, this was the electoral map in 1936. And this was the map in 1860, right before the Civil War. Notice the electoral divide between North and South? So again, how one presidential election looks does not necessarily indicate how all presidential elections will look, depending on the issues of the time and also depending on who's running. So now, not only do you know what the Electoral College is, but now you also know why it was put in place to begin with. By the way, if you want to know more about electoral maps, go to 270towin.com, and no, they are not paying me to say this. I actually use them in my classroom when I teach history. Excellent resource. They have every electoral map from every presidential election. They're actually where I got the pictures that I used today for this video. Well, that's it for today's episode. I hope you now better understand how the president is elected here in this country. Per the usual, if you have any questions or comments, please leave them respectfully and politely in the description box below. I'm Mr. McGee. Take care.